The following episode may contain major spoilers for any adventure or plot details contained within the material. We strongly encourage players who are about to embark upon this adventure to stop and ask themselves if they really want to ruin the experience that their friends are crafting for them. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to another episode of Legend Lore, the podcast series where two dungeon masters flip through one tabletop RPG book at a time, giving their insights on the pros and cons of the publication in question. Hi, I'm Adam, and with me is Sean, and today we're going over our thoughts on the Chaosium product, Call of Cthulhu Investigator Handbook. But before we get into this product, though, let me ask a couple of questions, and let's roll initiative. I got a 1, but you're going to bump me up to a 19.
If I just let it in slowly, does it?
Oh, baby. Aha! Hey, and you got a 19.
There we go.
Well, together we got a 20, so I'm going first.
Okay.
All right, so no. My first question is, what do you know about this system, this game, Call of Cthulhu, the tabletop role-playing game, and specifically this book? How familiar are you with it?
I happened to have a series of bits and bytes show up on my hard drive one day, and
yep.
So I've browsed the Investigator Handbook once or twice. I know of the stories of Lovecraft. Can I say that I've actually gone out and read them? No. I've probably read one or two in passing, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the, if you'll pardon the pun, cult following that
Sure. Yeah.
That he has, and I get that kind of thing. And frankly, that's kind of what turns me off of Cthulhu media in general.
Oh, yeah? It's not the blatant racism? That's what turns me off of it.
I mean, that's pretty bad as well.
Yeah. But,
that's right up there, actually. Yeah, now that you mention it. But anyways, I've played one or two sessions of it.
You played more than that. You sat at my table for a few months.
Did I?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. We got through a number of cities.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Time's a blur, man.
Oh, fuck. Tell me about it. No, you joined us in London.
Yep.
And we had made it through most of France.
Did we really?
Oh, fuck, yeah.
Jeez Louise. That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. It was, I don't want to say pre-pandemic, but I think it was just post-pandemic, right?
Maybe?
Yeah, I'm telling you, because pre-pandemic was my evil campaign, and then I recycled some of those players into Call of Cthulhu.
Okay.
So, soon as it came back, soon as the lockdown ended. So
cool. I'll ask you the same.
I love H.P. Lovecraft. I have read everything that he has written. I don't remember a lot of it because I read it all in my 20s and then my early 20s, and then I partied a lot in my late 20s. So
that's fair.
I distinctly remember a couple of really smaller stories of his that stick out in my brain. Like Dagon, I think might be the one that I know the best for some reason. It's not particularly unique in any way, but if someone were to ask me what's my favorite one, that one, because I remember it the clearest, and I think I've consumed it more often than everything else because of how short it is. I am familiar with Lovecraftian lore and cosmic horror in a big way, and I love a lot of the Lovecraftian movies and stuff that we've gotten over the years. It's hard to do cosmic horror, but it is interesting and fun when we get to it. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast because I'm a fan and Dan is a fan, and we've got a couple other people that are like, I know that Pepperina has run a number of Call of Cthulhu sessions at this point, and I would say I'm fairly familiar with it. I was the Arcane Keeper of Secrets for a little over a year and a half, so I got very, very familiar with both the Investigator's Handbook and the Keeper Guide as well, and I've got opinions, but I would say that I'm fairly well versed with this material. So, but you haven't really cracked open this Investigator Handbook. I also want to say, I really do fucking love the mechanics, the system that they have for this. I almost like it better than D&D, just mechanically speaking. And I would love to play other games with specifically this mechanical system. I think it's almost perfect. Almost. The combat needs some fucking fine-tuning, but it's almost. Yeah. For the record, before we go any further, we are talking about the 7th edition.
Okay.
Right, so...
Are there 8th and 9th editions, or just...
I believe it only went up to 7. I remember seeing a rumor that there was going to be an 8th edition a few years back, and then I think it fizzled. Chaosium is still releasing some books, but it's almost like people get passionate about a small project, approach Chaosium, say, hey, I made a thing, and they say, yeah, we'll publish that. Right? I know they're doing board games right now.
Okay.
In the world of Call of Cthulhu. I think they're adapting some of the big modules, the big adventure paths, so into board games, which is interesting. But
neat.
We could really use another set of editor's eyes on a new edition, I think. What do you think should be so the Investigator Handbook is meant for the players, right?
Yep.
It's a player's handbook. What do you think is necessary in a player handbook? Because we've gone through a number of different games.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the necessary bits?
I'm going to note that oftentimes the games that we have already taken a look at here, and oftentimes when I'm taking a look at other systems, other places, it's not as common to find the player's handbook, for lack of a better term, separated from the rest of the game system. Yeah. Oftentimes...
it's one big tome.
It's one big tome, and whatever GM secret materials need to be kept secret to the game master of sorts will often be included just as a chapter somewhere in the book. This is how you run the game.
Yeah.
That said, what I would expect from a PHB, or a player's handbook, the investigator's handbook, I need to pause for a second. I can't see this without seeing Investigator, which is...
Really?
Yeah, a Netflix show of a bunch of kids who investigate things about with their best friends. That's going to bother me for the rest of the episode. And if I say it, we almost need to have a counter.
All right. Well, I'm going to count it as one because you've introduced me to this concept now.
You're welcome. So anyways, I would expect that there would be some explanation, at least of a high level overview of the mechanics. I would expect character creation. I would expect a little bit of lore. That's it.
I would say character creation is, of course, key. I would say that how to play the game is key. Like, what are the basic rules? It should be laid out in like the first book that you have to buy, whatever the core rule book is. And if they split it up, then it should be in the Investigator Handbook, right? And I think it needs a lot of lore and a lot of flavor. When we looked at Cthulhu Tech, when we looked at Spire, which is on the Patreon, when you bring the tome that is Lancer over to my house, the lore is thick, the lore is deep. If you're introducing new players to the system, it's not enough to say, this explores cosmic horror or gigantic mechs or fairy tale vistas. You need to get into specifics. It has to be more than just a general invitation. It needs to be a solid hook with strong lore to latch onto to say, I want to be a part of that, right? So... I'm
going to ask a question that may be spoilers for the end of the episode. Did they accomplish that in the, 150 pages?
I think it's a little more than that page count, but not much more. And
let's find out.
And I would say that the other thing that you desperately need is
250
is a fuck ton of good art.
Okay, yes.
Especially if you're going to be dealing with Lovecraftian cosmic horror. That kind of art, even if it's vague H.R. Geiger kind of shit, or it's Giger, or it is more abstract. Like, I don't. Did you ever read the original Arkham Asylum graphic novel?
No, I don't think so.
That looked like a scrapbook from a madman. And the art was beautiful the way they put it together, but it was very abstract. Even if it is these kind of like not cartoony, not magic card level of art, which is what we're getting out of Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, and they look like they can be out of a comic book or off of a magic card or out of some art students' Pinterest where they like really fucking love dragons, right? Like, this needs to be darker and weirder, and it needs to reflect the way that Spire was very bold with their art, right? And there was a lot of it. Is there anything that you are concerned about with a book like this? Anything that you don't like? I remember when I invited you to the Call of Cthulhu table, and you had a caveat. You had a humming and hawing about what you didn't want. Do you remember what you said?
I don't actually. Remind me.
You told me, I'm in it for the investigation. I'm in it to sit around and have fun with the guys. I am not interested whatsoever in the horror aspect, and if it's just going to be body horror and gore, count me out.
I am not a fan of body horror and gore.
Yeah.
I mean, but I don't mind it if it's on the movie I'm watching. Like, if it's there.
The last time we hung out, we went and saw Alien Romulus.
Right?
Yeah. So.
Like, especially if it's subject matter that I'm interested in. But I'm not really that interested in Lovecraft, if I'm being honest, right? And me being the collection of biases and, things that I am, I was already pre-biased against Lovecraft. Sorry.
Look, and that's fair. And that's kind of why I like you for this episode, is because you're going to give an honest review of the mechanics in the book and what it offers, as opposed to being swept away by the wacky tentacle shenanigans of Lovecraft, right? So, all right, let's roll initiative and start digging through this book.
All right.
You go first this time.
Oh, you son of from 5 to 13, and you drop down to a 5.
Fuck. All right. Well, you're first, sir.
Well, cover is dark and like visually dark. It's not thematically dark necessarily. You've got a gigantic Cthulhuoid idol in the middle of it with a bunch of people who are, if they're 6 feet, this thing's probably 40 feet tall.
Yeah.
I mean, the art in and of itself is very evocative of what I would expect from a Cthulhu adventure.
It does feel like a gigantic ancient god.
Yep.
Like molded out of bronze, right?
Yep. With arcane inscriptions and...
Yep.
Yeah. That's very cool. It kind of sets the stage for what you would expect out of this. Unearthing arcane secrets, I suppose. Yeah, as we mentioned, from Chaosium Inc., it's got a little blurb on the back. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. It's a quote from Lovecraft, apparently. Not that I would know.
You familiar with the concept of the Dark Forest before we go any further?
Yes.
Lovecraft very much, without knowing that phrase, without like digging into the implications of the Dark Forest, he very much, I think, believed in that. Like, as long as we stay on our rock and we keep to ourselves and we do not get the attention of other scarier beings out there, things should be okay until they wake up and then we're fucked, right? The idea of the malevolent nature of the universe is very much something that scared the shit out of him in real life. And so I feel like Timothy Chalamet could play fucking H.P. Lovecraft in a fucking
oh god,
biopic. I would be very much
biopic.
I know,
you son of a.
I know it makes you twitch every time I say it, but that is how you pronounce it.
I will say that's probably how you pronounce it.
All right. Okay. What is
Nope.
If it's not chemistry or physics, what's the subject in science subject in school? Biology. Biopic.
Nope. I refuse your reality.
Okay, tell me what word says bio.
I'm not. Nope. I refuse to have this conversation. I steadfast on the elasticity of the English language. No.
All right. Well,
you also say tour, motherfucker. It's tour.
Yeah, you go on tour.
Yeah, you're wrong, you son of a...
Is it route or route? I'm curious.
Depends.
On?
Context.
Elaborate.
Okay. If I am drawing directions on a map, I am drawing the route. If I am asking for directions for something, I'm asking for the route to something.
Weird.
Yeah.
For me, it is I don't even know. I will flip-flop back and forth between it because I'm en route to something.
Well, at the same time...
But I need to know the route there.
It's also a router, not a router. Or is it a router? No, it's a router.
It's a router. It's not
very much a router.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
We've
now you've got me all muddled. I hate you. All right. Inside cover, we've got... I'm assuming that's Lovecraft himself.
Yes, that is Lovecraft
with a whole bunch of scribbles in the background.
Is that actually words?
Words? It looks like it's vaguely supposed to be, but vaguely supposed to be.
It's very, very small, and it's very gray in the background.
Yeah, black and white. It's evocative of somebody writing.
Yeah, it's moody.
Yeah, you get a couple of pages of filler, a couple more. Oh, now we've got a brown, a sepia colored.
Exact same image.
Yeah, the exact same image. Yep. Apparently this is for Lynn Willis. Who is Lynn Willis?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of copyrights from 1981 all the way up to 2019 in this book.
Yeah, this is a very, very old game.
Yeah.
7th edition, I think, has been the longest standing. If I am correct, I may be wrong on that. but it's the one that I have been most aware of for the longest. So
Sure.
I do remember when 5th edition was around, but that was a long ass time ago, and I couldn't get my hands on books. I saw them in the comic book store, and I wanted them, but they were prohibitively expensive.
I'd bet sometime after 2005 because the copyright lines up with that.
Yeah, about that, probably, yeah.
Neat. Okay. Looks like flipping the page, getting past that. Looks like we've got a nice illustration here. Dark night and an altar and ancient rituals and beasts of unknowing terror in the middle of the forest. This one's actually full color, which is kind of nice, even if it is dark colors, like visually dark, not necessarily thematically dark. It's very neat to see. Going into the table of contents, we've got 9 chapters, a 10th that's a reference, an index, and a bunch of sheets and acknowledgements. And yeah, get right into chapter 1.
All right, let's actually go through what are the chapters that we're looking at here. Chapter 1 clearly is introduction, but then what do we have?
Chapter 2 is the Dunwich Horror, which
Dunwich.
Dunwich.
Yeah.
Okay. I know. Okay. Now.
And I know you know that too,
Yeah.
but it's late on a Friday.
Yeah. And frankly, the English like to throw consonants in things and then not pronounce them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Worcestershire sauce. So where's your sister sauce?
Watch your sister sauce.
Yeah. That's actually the full printed short story, The Dunwich Horror.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, in this book, that is there. Instead of, this is what to expect in, we get a few pages of that in chapter 1, but it's more about, like, the gameplay and kind of the theme and tone. And then they give you an actual short Lovecraftian story that's, like, 20 pages long.
Mm-hmm. And that's similar to, like, we've seen in other manuals where they will have suggested reading lists or suggested listening lists.
But because he was prolific with short stories,
yeah,
he's very famous for short stories, and it's all public domain, which means you can do whatever the fuck you want with it.
Yeah.
It was honestly, it was a bold choice to put it there, but not a bad choice, and I don't hate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I respect that. That's fine. Chapter 3, Creating Investigators. It breaks down the steps, gives you reference charts and the like. Chapter 4, Occupations,
that's going to replace your classes and backgrounds in D&D speak.
Yeah. Which, interestingly enough, is not included in Creating Investigators.
No, Creating the Investigators, all the biology and, like, your backstory and all that stuff. And,
okay.
And it's you rolling for your stats. When I say biology, it's like your hit points, your constitution, and all that shit, right?
Sure.
So.
Your meat bits.
Yep.
We go from occupations to skills. Gives you a list of skills, explains living standards and, optional rules. Gives you investigator organizations as well, a bunch of sample organizations.
Which I am sad to say we never dug into. There's a lot of really cool, flavorful ones in there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Life as an investigator, it's got, which apparently is 12 pages of nothing and then 1 page of monster-sized comparison charts. That was charts. Charts.
Yep.
Not charts. Charts. But then we've got the Roaring Twenties as its own chapter. I'm assuming that's just going to be detailing what the life and times of the time is.
Yeah.
Advice for players is chapter 9. Chapter 10 is a reference chapter with speeds and distances, equipment, map of Arkham. Arkham, explain more.
Oh, it's Arkham is a small New England town.
Okay, perfect. Then the index and investigator sheets, which are character sheets and acknowledgements at the end.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to dig into the first couple chapters, or we're going to be here all night. So
okay,
we'll do a couple chapters at a time. And I'm going to honestly skip the Dunwich Horror. So introduction has again another quote from this racist son of a bitch who we do not support, but his world is neat, and he cannot monetarily gain from it. So I will engage with the content. That's my moral line that I draw.
Okay.
So
I respect that.
Yeah. The introduction brings us all the basic ideas of the purpose of the game, about this book, cooperation and competition, winners and losers, example of play, blah, blah, blah. If this is your first game, like your first tabletop role-playing game, that's not a bad thing.
No.
It's not nearly as dense as Pathfinder or as open to interpretation as Vampire the Masquerade, right? It's not quite as even L5R is a lot of like open to interpretation as well. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of effort that the DM has to put into all the calls, and while there are mechanics, you are doing a lot of creating the world. This here really does have a simple system to understand. except fucking combat. That you'll scratch your head about for a long ass fucking time, because it has very clear rules. We'll get into this in the future. It has very clear rules about melee combat. It has very clear rules about distance and ranged combat. And it has very clear rules about chases. The three inherently blend in the way that you run this game, and they are not designed to blend.
Interesting.
So there are a lot of bizarre calls to make, but there's a lot of very interesting mechanics in here. When it gets into the example of play, it gives you different characters speaking as if it's a script, as opposed to actual mechanical breakdown of play. And that goes on for quite some time, about 2 pages. What the game covers is, essentially tells you it's the 1920s, it's a classic era, and the world is deep and dark and full of shadow and mystery. What you need to play it, you need this book, you need role-playing dice, you need the Keeper rule book, and that's only for the Keeper, and of course, paper, pencils and an eraser, and 2 or more people. Ideally, a quiet place and 3 or 4 hours in which to play the game. That is hopeful. That is a hopeful amount of time needed to play this game. And then it kind of breaks down what the different dice are, all this stuff. It is a general overall introduction to tabletop role-playing games.
Sure.
Which every single time that we open one of these books, it's always that. And I'm like, we know already, guys. But granted, not everybody does. So fine.
And it's still usually a good idea to read it just so you understand their thought process in a lot of things anyways.
Yeah, and if you are good at reading between the lines, you can kind of figure out what the purpose behind a lot of this shit is, and it's interesting to say the least. It gives you a bit of an insight, like you say, into when you've been GMing or DMing and being a keeper, as long as I have, as long as you and Dan and everybody else has been playing. Oh man, the wording that is used paints a fucking picture. Mm-hmm. And we can kind of see the thought process of the design behind the scenes here, and it's interesting to read these sections. We got another big full splash page of art. It's some sort of large veiny phallus.
It's phallic.
With a whole bunch of what looks like runic script. Very similar to Arabian script, or even Elvish. It's got a lot of those loops and swoops to it.
Sure.
And then chapter 2, which is the Dunwich Horror, big, beautiful 2-page spread of art there. And then the entire story, I'm going to skip through. It's got little art pieces here and there. All the information that you may want. The art in it is actually it's pretty good. Some of it's line art, which is really neat and cool. Shit that I would expect an artist would doodle when they were bored in university. And
sure.
Other bits and pieces seem almost like it was I appreciate when you have multiple artists, I guess is the point I'm trying to make, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say it's simpler, but it's not as detailed and grim as the line art.
It's still evocative.
It is, right? So I do appreciate the multiple artists involved. There are a number of pages. Finally, we get to chapter 3, Investigators. That investigator looks like he's had a bad fucking day. That is a man with wrinkles and scars.
Yep. And frankly, most investigators in this world are.
Yeah. One of the things that I will say outright is, if you're listening to this episode because you want to play Call of Cthulhu, be prepared to have your character die. There are 2 ways out: insanity and death. You do not win this. You may uncover the mystery and gain the knowledge, and that is your goal, but no one retires happily in Call of Cthulhu. That's not the fucking point. And if you are trying to fight monsters, you've already lost. So, we get into the investigators chapter. It says, before you roll the dice, there's a bunch of information you need to know about the different creation. There are basic steps here. You generate characteristics, which is your ability scores, right? You determine your occupation, which is the next chapter. You decide skills and allocate skill points, and you create a backstory, and then you equip your investigator. So, I'm going to run through this very, very quickly because it's a lot of this, dense information in paragraph form. There are very few flowcharts here to help you get from one thing to the next. They're not very easy, openly, evenly spaced, easy to read portions that this means this. This is a textbook. And the textbook is absolutely chock full of sidebars. And surprisingly, those sidebars are very necessary, and you will have trouble remembering what page they are on. If you do not have tabs ready to go to put into this book, or notes written down about what page you can find what, you're in for a bad fucking time. At one point, I was memorizing where the naming convention was in this book, because we had, how many players do we have? We had the guy who played Jed on the original Touring the Multiverse series, you, Dave, Kyle, James, and Terry. And I was the keeper. So 6 people around the table. So yeah, 6 players around the table plus me as the keeper. I knew that this was going to be a deadly campaign. And sure enough, when I said everybody roll up 4 characters to start with, were you the only one that didn't go through more than 1 character?
I came prepared with 2 characters, and the first one never died, unfortunately. Unfortunately.
Terry got in a fight twice, and both times his character died. Dave was on his 4th character. James was on his 2nd. Kyle he had a character that was so grievously wounded that he ended up, he didn't die, but he was removed to go heal for months at a time, right? So
yeah.
So he ended up swapping another character.
No, I had the pharmacist that kept asking people if they wanted to do cocaine about it.
Yes, and then you're like, hey, there's that guy over there that I'm pretty sure is evil. Let's poison him and all of his friends.
Yeah. Let's inject him with a whole bunch of heroin.
Yes. Yeah. That poison was heroin.
Yeah, that was awful.
Yeah.
That was.
You guys were not playing on the moral side of good.
No.
We did go through a body count, and I think probably played, I'm going to say 50 hours of gameplay by the time that all the bullshit on, showing up and, saying hi to everybody and what happened last time and all that. 50 hours of gameplay. And fuck did we go through characters. I'm going to say that we got 4 chapters into like a 23 chapter story in 50 hours. Now, there was a lot of fuck around. There was a lot of find out, but it was pretty intense, right? So you're going to need to know this creating investigators page, like this chapter, pretty freaking well, because there are some things like enhancing your background. Do low characteristics make poor investigators? Writing numbers on the investigator sheet. What do numbers mean? All of this stuff, these are sidebars and charts that are not in the table of contents, right? And they seem to interrupt each other and the general character building process as you're flipping through this area. So it is a bit intense. The damage bonus and build section here is a sidebar. And there's no real help here. So
no.
What's interesting about this section, and I can speak about it a little bit, is the damage bonus and build section is based on your size. That's one of the categories. Let me go through the categories here really quickly. I saw the character sheet at the back.
While you're doing that, it almost feels as if they've pulled the idea of a conversation at the beginning of the book and applied it to how they've laid out this chapter.
Yeah, it does feel stream of consciousness in a lot of places as well, just where they're presenting and how they're presenting the information. You have strength, which is what you think it is. Con, which is what you think it is. Size, which involves as well your hit points, as well as how much damage you do and what you can actually fight. Your dex is going to be largely used for initiative and dodging. Appearance is what everybody thinks charisma is until they learn better.
Right.
Education is its own thing, and that gives you skill points that you will need. You will never have enough skill points. The more you put into education, the better. The next is intelligence. These are more skill points. These are just general ones. Education is going to be dependent upon, I believe, the occupation that you choose. Mm-hmm. So how many education points are you going to get, and therefore how many skill points. But sometimes you're not educated. You want to play a hobo. You can still get intelligence points, and all of that is going to determine how many skills you get, how many skill points you get. And then power, which is your magic nonsense. You also have a sanity counter. It can go up and down. It usually goes down. A luck counter, which goes down because you are supposed to run out of luck. A magic points counter, which regenerates. It does go down, rarely goes up, but it can. It's linked to your power. And then your hit points, right, which are based on con and size, I believe. You also have a movement speed, which I believe is based on your dex and size. Mm-hmm. And then your skills and your weapons, and then your damage, bonus, build, and dodge, or your combat.
And frankly, a lot of those combination stats make sense.
Yes. Yeah, I really like having... I feel like it's all covered, right? Yeah. Because the idea of wisdom and all that stuff, a lot of your perception stuff is still covered in the skills, but if we're translating it to D&D, but your actual wisdom, would I know that? I don't know, man. Would you? Mm-hmm. You tell me what you know. It's time to role play, right? So this section on creating investigators breaks down how damage bonus and build interact, how size, what all of these different abilities break down to be.
Sure.
Your hit points, your movement rate, and everything else. How to allocate your skill points once you've determined your occupation. And then your personal interest, which is when your occupation doesn't give you everything that you need, your intelligence points give you everything else. Right? Like, yeah, I feel like my guy would on weekends be really into math. All right, I'm going to give him ranks into accounting. Right? Like, sure. Credit rating is incredibly fucking important.
This is probably one of my favorite mechanics in Call of Cthulhu, though.
Yes. What's interesting, though, is that before I get into it, I want you to know it breaks down how a credit rating works and how money works in like 2 or 3 different sidebars throughout this chapter, and I think the next one as well. It's all over the fucking place when it should be laid out clearly. The stream of consciousness here is when the designers are designing what do they feel like the next logical designing step is, not when the players are learning what is the next playable, like learnable point, right? This book is dense. You cannot hand it to someone and have them figured out within 20 minutes.
No, absolutely not.
No. So, as a matter of fact, I wrote up documents about what page to go to, what do we do next, and I handed it out to my players so that they knew what to do. And then we had an entire 4-hour session building characters and working through it. And then once it was all done, I then spent 2 weeks, I think it was before you joined actually, I spent 2 weeks coming up with what their gear lists would be based on their credit rating because they could not do the math and figure it out themselves. So I built packages for them to select. So it was intense building these characters. Once you've done it 2 or 3 times, easiest thing in the fucking world. But you need to know where to look on the page, right? So in the book. So credit rating is going to give you basically your living standards. It's also going to give you your liquid assets, like your cash on hand, which is cash on hand in this game is one of my favorite things, and I've now put it in my D&D game, where if it's under this amount, we don't track it. You just do it. If it's this amount to this amount, then you have access to it right now. You absolutely can do it, but mark it off of your gold, right? Take it out of your actual bank account. If it's higher than that amount, what assets do you have that you need to sell? Where do you have money elsewhere? Look to your magic items in D&D or your mount, or like, do you need to downgrade the keep that you're living in to a manor? Right? Like that kind of shit. And there's a lot of this. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels of credit rating here. And credit rating is dependent upon your skills. And there is a minimum that you have to have based on the occupation you chose. A doctor has to have a minimum in this credit rating. So whatever your skill points are, you have to allocate some of them here.
Absolutely.
That took a while for people to figure out when we were going through it. So then there's just some general ideas about kind of like, what are the meaningful locations in your life? How would you describe your physical appearance? Just character building. It just holds your hand through it, which is fine. Sean, let's randomly roll you a name from the 1920s generator.
Okay, there we go.
You need percentile dice. Most of this game is percentile dice.
I'm just going to move these d20s out of the way real quick here.
Yep.
74.
74, that's your first name. You're going to need to roll again here in a second. Oh, no, yeah. 74, under male name, you are Oswald.
That's awesome. 25.
Oswald Elsner.
Oswald Elsner. He is a brewer.
A lot of these names are absolutely hilarious. I'm gonna roll as well.
You roll.
Yeah. 41.
41 for male names. Here we go. First name. Oh, there we go. Figured it out. Howard.
Howard. Howard be that name. Okay, there we go. 58.
Moses. Howard Moses.
I actually played Ripley T. Moses in our Deep Dark of Radiance.
Yep.
So I've actually been Moses already, and it was a lot of fun being Rip Moses.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of really fun names in here. Dave famously was Samson Swanson. So like there's some good shit when they end up combining in some unique opportunities here. But there are 3 columns: male names, female names, and then surnames. And it's been a lot of fun. That's where Charity Flanagan came from for Mieka as well. All of them from Call of Cthulhu we rolled ourselves. So
that's awesome.
See, remember I said the cash and assets are pages away?
Yeah.
Right? So
after they've rolled your name, here's more stuff.
Yeah. After your treasured possessions, traits, your key backstory connections, additional details. And now they're like, what's your gender? Right? Like, It's all kind of backwards for building a character. All the info is here, and it's good info, but it takes a while. Everyone remember, and I will put it in the show notes, page 59 is the quick reference chart for half and fifths values. You will fucking need this always. This is a thing that every player needs. Once you write it into your character sheet during like the character creation, it should be smooth sailings from there until you start to adjust and actually level things, which can happen sometimes. There's no traditional leveling in Call of Cthulhu, but you can gear up and upgrade some skills at some points, right?
Yes. Which was something that I actually enjoyed about Call of Cthulhu, because one of the ways you could do it was actually using the skills and being really successful at them.
Yes. Yeah. And if you were very successful, then you would have a roll sometimes with advantage to try to roll underneath the number because you wanted to roll under. If you are 75 proficient in out of 100, then that means that you are 3/4 likely to do it, which means you have to roll under the 75 because the success would be in that 3/4 area, right? The concept of rolling under with percentile dice is such a good fucking concept.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. And it takes a little while for D&D players and Pathfinder players to wrap their head around it. But once they do, phenomenal. At the end of it, there are optional rules, like optional ways to create investigators or capped starting skill values or how to make experienced investigators already. It's good to know that these things are there. I don't play with it. And then we get another big splash page art with a literal Cthulhu icon, or idol, rather. This is the famous Cthulhu idol from the Lovecraftian lore. If you ever look up, what does Cthulhu look like, Lovecraft, this is the idol that everything is based off of, all of the art and everything else. And someone has repainted it here with some sort of monstrous creature behind it. And then quick reference investigator generation. Remember I said there needs to be a quick flow chart and everything? This here is not as helpful as you need it to be. It tells you what to do, but not what the details are or where to look in the book for it, right? So moderately useful once you've already done it 4 or 5 times. Like, oh yeah, right, this is the next step. But this was clearly an afterthought. It's at the end. It's at the end of the creating an investigator chapter, which is so counterintuitive.
Yeah. Why not throw it at the front so people would actually, maybe use it?
Yes.
Anyways, chapter 4, we can start off with another quote from a racist man, and a lovely 2-page spread with lots of color. This one's got a biplane, and some dude's trying to shoot a little, almost looks like a Luger, at a gigantic monstrosity behind him. That's not going to work well for you, but anyways.
So, to be fair, the quotes are not racist. The man was just racist.
Yeah.
So, as a matter of fact, I do know that Chaos Team has done everything in their power to remove themselves from the problematic nature of Lovecraft's life.
Mm-hmm. I'm completely thrown off now.
I do want to say, the monster is this giant flying, like it looks like it's something out of a Godzilla movie. Mm-hmm. And this guy is standing on the wing of a biplane, shooting a Luger.
Yeah,
like
it's not going to do much, but
no.
Anyways. Let's get into the occupations. We get a basic list of occupations. How would you explain occupations to somebody out of the gate? If you had 2 sentences, do you do it in?
Instead of a class or a background, you have a job. The job will dictate what you're good at. 2/3 of your character build will be based on your skills, and 2/3 of the skills will be based on your occupation. Mm-hmm. It is a big part of the game to choose your occupation wisely, and it will be a large part of who you are and how you identify your character in the game. That being said, you said it's a simple list, and while the list itself is simple, it's deep.
It also includes things like computer programmer, occultists.
It covers 3 general genres here. One is generic, all of it, right? Mm-hmm. That includes things like nurse and bartender and, strangely enough, forensic surgeon, right? Because the idea is these are inquisitive people. They're investigating things, right? So that's everything from like a gambler through to a hobo, through to a spy or a zookeeper. These are investigators, right? You're not going to get a whole bunch of like welders. You could, but it's not in the list.
No, you're better off going with something like what?
It's upside down.
Like, is there a repairman kind of deal?
Yes, there are. There's, but it's in your skills.
Sure.
Right? Where you can be good at machines or electronic.
Engineer.
An
Let's
engineer,
start there.
yeah, sure. Engineer would be fine. I think there's trades something somewhere. But it is very much like, I don't like the fact you can play a tribe member, but a lot of Cthulhuoid shit, it takes place in like the non-American parts of the world, right? The quote unquote, not my words, their words, uncivilized part of the world, right? So tribe member might be like, if your investigator dies in the deep jungle of Africa, you may join as the NPC that's been a guide, right? Therefore, and so I see the purpose in it. It feels a little iffy, and I feel like that should be something that could be taken out. But
I suppose part of what they're trying to do is capture that idea of the old reel-to-reel, old newsy, you know.
Yeah, it's the 20s, right? It's the roaring 20s. So the other things are, you get a bunch of things that are specifically for Lovecraftian stories specifically. If you're going to play a Lovecraft story, then there are occupations rather, like journalist or professor, right? If you're going to play in the modern era, there's your computer hacker and shit like that too. So
Sure.
There are a lot of occupations here. There's not necessarily, I had to, when I gave my list out to my players, I typed it up and I printed out, do not play these. Specifically, one of them was don't be a prostitute.
Yep.
Which is one of the options.
It's also interesting to me that they also list criminal occupations. They've got bank robbers on here, smugglers, street punks, and...
Yeah. There are all sorts of laborers as well. I think criminal, labor, and scientists get a lot of... Journalist, I think, gets some as well. Like, where you can be different versions of this occupation.
Yeah. All right. Moving along, and we get a basic breakdown of all the occupations. Now, there's like, how many?
Oh, 60 plus?
60 plus. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but...
Why don't we just grab one at random to,
Sure.
Give an example of what you might get with...
Big game hunter, why not? It's
Dave,
right there.
Dave is very happy.
Right? So it gives you a quick 2-paragraph synopsis of, what it considers a big game hunter. It gives you the idea of how many skill points. This is the education system that you were talking about. Your occupations skill points, and it gives you a quick breakdown of a little bit of math to be able to figure out what that is. And that's going to be your education skill times 2 plus your dex times 2 or your strength times 2, depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah.
It gives you an idea of your credit rating and how many points you need to have in that skill. This gives you a maximum and a minimum between 20 and 50.
They always give you a max and a minimum.
Yes. Yeah. Also gives you a list of suggested contacts, foreign government officials and market gangs, or black market gangs, and traders and zoo owners.
Sure.
And a list of skills that your character would be proficient in effectively.
Yes, and so when you're allocating your occupation skill points, it has to go into this list of skills.
Yes.
Later on, you will then add intelligence skill points to round it out, to fill in all the blanks, because sometimes you want to play a book dealer who is good at navigating because of their personal backstory. Navigation is not a part of what a book dealer does.
No. Right?
So it gives you the opportunity to flesh out. The idea is that everybody has hobbies, right? And life experience. So
yeah. And that's really it. I mean, they fit like 5 on a page.
Yeah.
And it goes on 4 pages. Like
lots and lots of options.
We're looking here, page 68 is when it starts, and it doesn't end all the way until like 89. Hold on. Oh, I'm skipping ahead.
Page
93.
So
wow.
Yeah, lots and lots.
I love that though.
Yeah. And there are little bits and pieces of art here too that we're skipping past. The art is, again, a variety. Like, we do get a bunch of very Lovecraftian feeling splash pages. Then there's line art, there's character art, there's going to be, at the beginning of every chapter, I think we have that one, like, really, like, artistically drawn letter that starts off like old books used to do, right? So...
yeah, the calligraphy almost.
Yes.
There's a name for that, but I can't remember what it is.
I can never remember it. My favorite example of it is actually in The Neverending Story, the actual book, which I read when I was a kid. The movie is a pale example of the first, 10 chapters of that book. It has 26 chapters, and each one starts with the next letter in the alphabet. And so you had a big splash page of this gigantic letter, and then the story would continue. It was very, very cool.
That's neat.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we get things like gigantic tentacle monsters with many eyes and green glow. And
I think that's literally Cthulhu in this one.
Perhaps. I could see a bunch of cultists in it, too.
Yeah.
But, Moving on, we get to chapter 5. Again, a beautiful 2-page spread with lots of color and action. We've got, looks like a team of investigators sneaking up on a bunch of cultists, which is pretty cool. And again, another quote from H.P. Lovecraft, this time from Beyond. And we get into the skills. We get a list of skills here. We get what the skill points mean, again in sidebar. We get combined skill rules, again in sidebar, skill specializations, and then a skill specialization sidebar.
This is what I mean, like,
yeah.
The layout here, you have to read it all. It is a fucking textbook, but my God, is it well thought out. This part of it, not so much the combat. So, yeah, there are two things that that you should know about the skills. First and foremost, some skills you just don't have access to, like occult. You just don't have access to that unless the keeper wants you to have it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is every skill has a minimum use. If you put 1 point into it, or even if you don't put any points into it, everyone can kind of do this to some degree. What's a good example here? Sleight of hand, everyone has a 10% chance.
And you have to roll below that.
Yes, right. Yeah. So, library use is 20% chance, right? You have to roll below a 20. So anyone has a 1 in 5 chance of a success to use a library to find what they're looking for, to do research, right? Some of them are like, what's archaeology? You have a 1% chance,
yeah,
right? You need the education for this one.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And things like it's also got a bunch that are gated by the system as well. Like computer use, you would only use that in a modern telling. A modern setting, right?
Yes.
Demolitions are going to be a little bit more uncommon, but yeah, sure, maybe. You know.
And then there are some skills like science and language and firearms where you actually have to be specific with it. Like it's you can find it on your character sheet where it's listed science, but then there are a bunch of blank spaces underneath it, and you've got to be specific geology, right? And then with geology, how much did you put into that specific science? It's the same thing for languages. If you speak French or Chinese, Mandarin or Cantonese, right? Like whatever language that you may speak, but and firearms as well. Which firearms you're proficient in?
Handguns, rifles.
Yeah, shotguns. There's machine guns and submachine guns. So there's a bunch of different stuff there. But I do want to point out there's a synergy. If you've got over 50% in any one of them, you get a specific bonus to all other sciences or languages or firearm skills that you may pick up. And so you can actually boost a number of skills if you kind of hard commit to one. So it's not for everything, but it is for a lot of them. Another one I think is craft. We never really played too much with crafting. Mm-hmm. But
I'm assuming there's something akin to performance as well.
Yes, it is early. It's been a while since I've looked at it. Acting is one. Oh, it's all under art and craft.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get, again, laid out probably about 60.
Yeah.
About 60 skills. And then we get little blurbs about each one. It also explains a concept called pushing. Do you want to give a quick rundown?
No, we're not breaking down the entire system, but like pushing is when you're like, hey, we failed, I'm going to try again, but it's going to be harder this time.
Okay.
This is where your halves and fifths come into play. Anybody that's played the system should be familiar with this. You either blow luck points or you push. If you want to hear about it, check out the Deep Darker Radiance episodes, especially the first one where we're doing the actual character creation. And it's just a bunch of cross-talking and bullshit for like a couple of hours as we figure this shit out. So, yeah. And then most of these are relatively the same.
Yeah. Let's just break one down real quick, though. Like history, for instance, you know, it's got a 5% rating next to it. What would you call that even?
Minimum.
Minimum? Yeah.
So everyone's going to have 5% chance of doing it, even if they don't put any skills into it.
Yeah. It gives you a quick blurb of what it would, you know, entail. For history, it enables an investigator.
You are the investigator, let me tell you.
To remember the significance of a country, city, region, or person as pertinent. The successful role might be used to help identify tools, techniques, or ideas familiar to ancestors, but little known today. It gives a quick idea of what examples you could use to push it, and sample consequences of failing a pushed roll, which I'm assuming Arcane Keeper of Secrets would have a lot of input on.
There's also a section at the bottom, and not every one of them has this, but a lot do. If an insane investigator fails a push roll. That's really interesting. We never got to that point. We were doing more bodily damage because you guys were very much in D&D mode.
Yes.
But a couple of characters were dropping insanity pretty steadily for a while there, and we didn't really get to play too much with insane investigators, which is too bad because I thought that would have been a lot of fun. But yeah, that's mostly what the skills have to offer, right?
Yeah.
There's just pages and pages and pages of it.
Sleight of hand, spot, hidden, and stealth, all separate skills, which is interesting.
Throw is a skill as well, which is nice. Survival and navigate and natural world are all different skills. Like, they do break it down in a unique way, and I do appreciate it. I feel like almost everything was covered.
Excellent. They do have some optional rules. I don't think we need to get into them here very much.
But it does talk about languages, which is good.
And gets us into
investigator organizations. Now,
the investigators are...
these are the idea of what a group actually is, whether or not you're related by blood, society of mutual interest, you're working together, it's a shared experience, or you are acquaintances for some reason. And it gives you about a page, 2 pages maybe, of a breakdown of these ideas with its sidebar, and then example organizations that you might have. And there's just a fucking list of them. Each one of them is about a half a page worth of context. It's broken up by a bunch of little, what I would consider to be comic book level art. Simple drawings with simple coloration to it as well. I like it. It's all very good. It's clearly all hand drawn and not computer generated by any means, right? Which for this, I appreciate the shit out of, right?
Absolutely.
Then we can just get a bunch of just like, for some reason, we get NPCs and lots of profiles of NPCs for pages and pages and fucking pages to round out the rest of this chapter. Some are more intense than the others. Most of them are tied to one of the organizations. I'm not going through the organizations.
No,
but
absolutely.
There are some from Lovecraftian lore that are not included. And I went, that would have been neat to add that. But there's a wide variety of examples. And there's enough for me to work with to build my own. But there's not a whole lot of mechanics to it. The idea is that this is the reason your group came together, or these are the sponsors of your group, or these are enemy groups. There's no mechanics for it. After that is life as an investigator, and it's going to get into the idea of the different procedures you may use to gather information through the years, because sometimes it's through photography, and other times it's through the internet, right? So when you are at the scene of a crime or an instance you're trying to investigate, and then how to carry out a plan, how to make a plan, carry out a plan, tactical considerations, coded communications, team composition, equipment. This is the shit that our table never read.
No.
They went into it like D&D players, which was the wrong fucking way to go into it. This seems like a lot of it is pretty on the nose. Yeah, of course, this is how you would do it. But actually stop and read this. This is weirdly useful information that you might not expect it to be. There's quite a few pages, 10 pages of it or so. But I feel like it just gets skimmed over. A lot of how the game should be run are in these pages as far as the mentalities the player should have, right? The same way that I had to talk Mieka into being a fucking hero and not run away from the first giant fucking toad that she ran into on the first D&D session. She's like, ew, it's how big? Ew, I'm going back the other way.
Wait, no.
What are you doing? Kill that fucking thing.
Pretty amazing.
By the way, she missed with her Eldritch Blast, and it immediately ate her. An NPC came out of the woods to save her life. And that is how we started. Because she was on death saves in a toad's mouth. She was having none of it. Like, round 1 of combat, first session ever. So
poor Mieka.
I mean, so after that, we end up getting the size comparison chart. It does have a little dinky human being down at the bottom, and then it gives us everything from Yogg Sothoth to the great Cthulhu, and to your D-hole.
I'm not gonna even try. I'm not gonna try. I tried once. I'm not gonna try a second time. I will not try to pronounce any of these.
Nyarlathotep is actually listed here. It's actually shown. That's really cool. That was the evil that we were trying to work against in the Deep Dark Irradiance campaign.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have a concept for what it looks like or how to deal with it, but there's an image of it here. There are surprisingly few images of these things throughout the Call of Cthulhu campaigns. So this is one example. And then we get into the Roaring 20s. This is just the history of the 1920s. This is a passion project book. I'm not getting into it, but this is absolutely, it includes a 2-page spread of the chronology of the Roaring Twenties from 1918 to 1930. Useful information for 1920s investigators. I skipped the 4-page spread of just what life was like, right? How forensics works, keeping a lookout, how to use light, capturing evidence, vehicles on the water, vehicles in the air, period cars and trucks, which is just a sidebar. Again, you think
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So, and then a breakdown of what all the different guns are, a sidebar on parachutes. I feel like when you need to know this, it's too late to go hunting the sidebar, right? So,
absolutely.
A lot of information about firearms. And then just like, who are the celebrities and artists and shit of the times as well, after firearms in the same section.
Well, it's interesting because we already had a kind of telling of the world and state of the world in the Dunwich horror bit since the beginning, right?
Yep. And but that was kind of like the theme of the world. But this is what life was like. And this is all historically accurate. Mm-hmm. All of this is historically accurate. And it is by far the most intimidating part of Call of Cthulhu for me as a keeper. Because what do I know about the 1920s? Sweet fuck all. It is a blind spot for me. I can talk pretty intelligently about what's going on between the 50s and the 90s. Like, I got a good handle on that. And World War II. And I know World War I. But if you asked me what happened in the 20s, I'd be like, Al Capone, I think? Am I off there? And by decades. I could be off by decades. There were flapper girls, there was Prohibition, and there was the Great Depression. I don't know what happened in Europe.
That's fair. Something green light across the bay, right?
Yeah, like there are some things, and like Europe between World War I and World War II was in upheaval, right? It was fucking wild, the shit that was going on in every one of those countries. Some of them were absolutely broken down and poor as fuck post-war, trying to put the pieces back together, and others were like, I'm a protest. Hey, France, what are you doing? Protesting. The 1920s for protesting, and our protesting will be effective. We are going to learn how to do it, and we will never forget. And that's when France like started all that shit. And we ran into that in our campaign. There was a bunch of protests in France, and like this information that they give us in this area, so useful. But it's tip of the iceberg. You have to become a historian almost, because it covers everything from religion to crime to journalism, law enforcement, military, scholars, occult and parapsychology. That was big in the 20s, right? And occult didn't mean what it means today. Mm-hmm. Right? But all of these things that were happening, we get one page in the book. There's an entire decade worth of information out there, right? So it points you in the right direction to learn more. Very cool, very useful. Something everyone who wants to play this game should read, at least skim through and go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And I would hazard to say this section should have come before. What occupation do you want to play? Yeah. Right?
This should have come either before or directly after the second chapter, frankly.
Yes, yeah, the Dunwich Horror. Yeah, absolutely. And then you start to, like, it keeps going. Newspapers in the 20s, newspapers from around the globe, press associations, all the way into chapter 9, which is advice for players. Then what was that? The fuck did we just talk about for 10 minutes? All right, here you go, Sean. Advice for players.
All right. This one, of course, comes with a gigantic 2-page spread of an image. Very, like, underwater looking Cthulhuoid monster. Lots of blues and greens.
It looks like halfway between a tentacle monster and an ooze monster.
That's very accurate. And there's, like, misplaced mouths all over the place. Also, Color Out of Space. Did you ever watch that?
Yeah, I don't like Nicolas Cage.
Right, we had that conversation. So this is advice for players. It's going to break down playing the game and expectations of play, what would be considered character knowledge, and how cooperation is a linchpin, that level of stuff, you know.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I want to point out that if you're in this to play solo, which is one of the downfalls of our campaigns, we had at least one player that was in it for themselves. It will derail the fucking campaign and other people will die as a result of it.
Yeah. I love that it has an entire section on replacement investigators. Yep. Just make sure you've got a couple. And don't rely on guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I want to point out, too, there are sidebars here without titles.
Yeah.
What the shit?
And they're just like little mini stories. describing scenes at a table.
Yep.
Amazing.
This is interesting, but again, the sidebars, while they are important information, I feel like they should have been a section unto themselves, right?
Well, and a lot of this is so after the initial section of playing the game, it goes into problems in play, and it starts talking about problems with other players and hogging the limelight, and paying attention to each other, and housekeeping and setting the tone, and distasteful historical themes, which is absolutely something that needs to be talked about in session 0.
Yeah, and I feel like this section should have been in chapter 1.
Right?
Right? So it's just, this book has everything that I need to be a player, but it is wildly messy.
Someone took the book and did a Whipple procedure on it.
Yes, and let me tell you, this is a theme for Call of Cthulhu books.
Mm-hmm. It also goes into playing in period, how to handle sanity and when to actually roll dice. You set goals. How do you narrate success and accept failure?
I don't accept failure.
You can.
This is how I know that you are my longest standing friend, is because when I say that to anybody else, it derails them, and you just keep fucking moving right along. Adam, I'm done with your shit already.
I try to ignore you.
I fucking appreciate it. Thank you so much for not being the Statler to my Waldorf.
It also goes into social interaction, moving along.
Yeah.
And how to push perception rolls and things like that.
Do you feel like by the time we get to this section here, skills and contacts, it's a little fucking late in the book?
Right?
Considering we've been through that shit.
Well, and skills and contacts are how many chapters before this? Creating investigators, so
that's what the contacts were, right?
Yeah.
And skills were chapter 5, we're chapter 9 now.
Yeah.
Right? And
it's all over the place. I absolutely agree with you.
And just random pictures of random people from the 20s. Just thrown in here to eat up space. When there were whole sections about life in the 1920s.
And then after all of that, after all of it, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs on combat and fighting in combat.
Yep. I will say that information is covered more in depth in the Keeper rulebook.
Okay. And for the most part, it's roll under target number.
Yes, yeah, it is the heavy lifting of the Keeper to do combat.
Yeah.
So that's not an unfair position for it to be. However, it'd be really useful to be able to know that. Now, here's actually a gigantic picture of Nyarlathotep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Kind of bony.
Kind of xenomorph vibes.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
But it's cool that it breaks down playing phobias and manias.
That's a big factor in the Keepers.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, I feel as if that is a fantastic thing for a book to actually teach people how to play appropriately.
Yes, I wish there were I would hope 8th edition, if it ever comes out, and I hope it does. I love this game. If 8th edition ever comes out, there should be a conversation about how to handle these things delicately, because some of them are really neat, like you have a phobia of the number 13.
Sure.
Cool, no problem. And others are like dissociative identity disorder. I'm like, might want to check that in your session 0.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm sure it also goes over things like anxiety in general.
PTSD and shell shock is a big fucking deal. So,
once we're through that, we get to chapter 10, which is the reference section. Again, another beautiful 2-page art spread. This time it's a little bit more subdued than in the other pages, though. We only really get half a picture there. And I'm going to let you take over.
Sure. Because it's fucking wild.
Right?
Yeah. So,
I don't know what I'm looking at.
So the reference is, it says 100 years and more. Everything that happened in 1890, and it gives you essentially a history lesson of the biggest, most important things, keeping in mind this is European and American centric. So we're going to get things like the Balkan War, President McKinley was assassinated, fire and flood created a human hell at Oil City, Pennsylvania, 130 dead, the cholera vaccine. All this happened in 1892. Cape Johannesburg Railroad was completed. Crown top for bottles was invented. The diesel engine was patented in 1892. All of this is listed out. It is just a timeline that goes from 1890 up until, whenever this book was published, which is 2012. Is the last entry, right? So, Austrian skydiver Felix Baumgartner becomes the first person to break the sound barrier without machine assistance when he jumps 24 miles to Earth at Roswell, Mexico. I remember that happening. I didn't think that that would be a thing that would pop up in this book, right? And it's just, there was so little about combat and so much about timelines. And again, there's a whole section about the 20s and the life and what the literal goddamn fuck do I need to know about 1973 in my 1920s or my 2012 game? It's not bad that it's included, but I feel like it's misplaced within the book, and I could have used some combat rules. Would have been nice for any one of my players to understand how a goddamn chase works. Fuck. Speeds and distances is the next portion. These are just lists and charts of average carrying speeds, average ship speeds for container ships, tankers, factory ships, cruise ships, fucking hovercraft. The 1920s, men's clothing, lots of options with prices. Women's clothing, and this actually was really helpful for when you have your credit rating and you know how much money you have. Build your fucking list of what you're taking with you, what you own, and all this. Having prices matters. Mm-hmm. But man, they get it at 39 cents for sock garters and 75 cents for canvas bathing shoes. That's for men. For women, you can have a bathing cap for 40 cents. I feel like this was an unnecessary amount of detail. So when I say passion project, when I've talked in previous episodes about how you could tell like the creators and designers honed in on their love for like the setting. This is what I'm talking about.
Well, you know what happened with this, right? Somebody found a Sears catalog from 1921 and just lifted and dropped it into this.
Sure, until you get into meals out and speakeasy prices, lodging, furniture, medical equipment, right? Like, there's so much. There are 6 items under luggage. If you are humming and hawing about the suitcase you have, that is a level of detail that I do not think is warranted for a tabletop role-playing game unless you dive so headfirst into it. And this is a setting because it actually existed. And you can find the research, there is information out there. You can go whole ham on it because you don't necessarily need to make it up. Mm-hmm. It existed, it was there. Absolutely. And you can price it out. There's different investigator tools. I am skipping over a lot of this. Air travel, fairs. Right? Entertainment, sports and games, ammunition, melee weapons, and then for modern day, electronics, more lists for clothing, and sea voyages and all that stuff. We get to the weapons table, which is clearly like the spine has been broken here in this book, because Dave happened. I'm not even joking. The weapons table does hand-to-hand weapons for over a page, handguns for over half a page, rifles, shotguns, assault rifles, submachine guns, machine guns take up 2 more pages, and then explosives, heavy weapons, and miscellaneous. Miscellaneous includes claymore mines, hand grenades. There's a lot of fun stuff in here. A 75mm field gun. I have questions. But are
they questions that can be answered with a field gun?
Yes. I hazard to find a question that can't be answered with a field gun.
I agree.
All right. So when you are dealing with a post-World War I, pre-World War II setting, it makes sense that there will be a lot of military excess that is around, and it makes sense that there will be, I know both World War I and World War II, there was exploration going on in and around. King Tut's tomb was found in the 20s.
Yep.
Right? Like, white people were expanding into places that they didn't belong to explore places, and a lot of the time the military was either part of that exploration or an escort or a nearby embassy or base for people to go to. So it makes sense why this shit would be involved. Didn't expect it when I first cracked this open, right? And then there's just kind of a key for what skill to use, what damage means, how many bullets in a gun. Because all of these, I say there's a list of this stuff, it's actually a big ass chart that includes the name of the gun, the skill you need to use, the damage that it does, the base range, the uses per round, because a gun is easy to use multiple times in a single round. Bullets that are in the gun, the cost of it, how often it will malfunction, and which era, that it'll, like what time era that it'll show up in, right? And so then it breaks down kind of all the things you'll need to know about it. And then there's converting from previous editions of Call of Cthulhu, which is neat, sure, not applicable to me, but if you're worried about that, then there's 3 pages and a piece of art about it. And then we get into maps. That's Arkham, Massachusetts, Miskatonic County, and then the index. The index bleeds right into our character sheets. We get one for the 1920s era. We get one for the modern era. And then we get acknowledgements. Playtesting is a full, dense page of names. And thanks to the following Kickstarter backers who sacrificed to raise Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. And there's a fuck ton of them. Fuck ton of them. Pages and pages and pages of them. And that brings us to one last disgusting piece of art, which is a tumor.
It's all limbs.
There's a lot of bulbous boils, and then just like, hey, here are other products that we sell from Chaosium, right? And that's the end of the book. We went pretty deep on this one, but let's grab dice and roll.
Okay. Let me get these ones out of the way.
I was at a 15, and you bumped me to a 17.
You're welcome.
So, overall impressions of the content. I fucking love this book. I love the content in it, but it is because I read it front to back 4 or 5 times. My overall impressions of the content, it's disorganized as fuck. I don't hate the art. I don't hate the fact that they use real photographs from the 20s in a lot of places in here. I love that they have... It's a labor of love. The details in this are intense and immense, and this book, the mechanics are very well thought out, because this book doesn't include combat.
Yay!
Right? So, it doesn't include the sanity rules. It doesn't include... chases, and I guess that's my big negative here. When you are building your character and you don't understand what some of the future mechanics that you will need to be proficient in, when you don't know what those are, how do you appropriately build your character? Now, it is a minor detail, and you should not be getting into combat in the first place. You should be holding on to your sanity as long as you can, and avoiding phobias. That's the point of the game. But the point of the keeper is to provide those conflicts and challenges, and for you to have to deal with the consequences. Because it's not included in this book, it feels like a lot of those consequences are gotchas the first time you play.
I agree. I feel like this book could be 150 pages shorter and be rearranged. It obviously needs to be rearranged, but it could be 150 pages shorter and still get the mechanics out, especially considering that they spent a lot of time detailing specifically the 1920s and that era, and mentioning, oh yeah, by the way, you can use it in a modern era. You can, you know, there are ways you can extend this. I feel like it would have been better served doing that. You have a core rulebook that goes over just the character creation skills, yada yada, and then a separate book akin to what we get with campaign settings.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. How does Cthulhu interact with a 2012 world? That should be a book. The same way that how does it interact with the 1920s world in New England, or 1920s world on the Mediterranean, or 1820s world, right?
Yep.
Like, hit us through the eras. I have seen homebrew stuff online where people say, hey, I'm setting mine in ancient Greece. Fucking neat.
That's cool. And I feel like if they had designed the books in that way, there would be a lot more flexibility with the system.
Now, I am going to say as well that the majority of the settings themselves, or not the settings, but the adventures and whatnot, are set in New England or set in Europe. They're very much leaning into the Lovecraftian themes.
Sure.
And so therefore, it's going to focus on that, right? But I will say, this Chaosium feels like a pretty decently sized publication, or publication company. It isn't. It's actually very small. It's Kickstarter funded. It is a handful of guys with a fuck ton of love and passion, right? Not just guys. There are a lot of women involved in this too. I want to point that out as well. Like, there's a good mix of men and women in this. And I believe, and it could just be my experience on Reddit here, but I believe that Call of Cthulhu is actually really popular with the LGBT community.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, if there's anybody that knows existential dread,
I guess, right?
Not to put too much of a point on it, but like, yeah.
I had a thought and I lost it.
We were talking about the fact that it's a small company.
It's gone.
All right.
Whatever. Sorry.
But yeah, I hear what you're saying about the fact that it needs like campaign setting books.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if it had a full-time, even if it was 6 people, a full-time like employees attached to it, then over the years we would have gotten these things. But instead what they've done is they've jammed it all into this, and then they jammed the rest of it into the Keeper's Rulebook to say, hey, you only need to buy 2 books, don't worry about it. They are expensive. They are, I'm not going to say cost prohibitive, but they're as expensive, if not more expensive, than a regular Dungeons & Dragons book.
And probably difficult to come by because they are a smaller publisher.
Yes, as a matter of fact, you need to. I have only seen it out in the wild in comic book stores that focus heavily on tabletop role-playing games. Not even most comic book stores will carry these. So I know that TNN Games, for example, at Lowe's Mall doesn't carry it, but Hourglass Comics does, right? And so depending on where you go. And I think that they order them off of the Chaosium website and hold on to a couple of issues or a couple of books until they get bought, and then they order the next one, right? So hard to come by. Yes, absolutely. You may just have to order it yourself. How do you feel about the artwork in this? Well, Self, I loved it. Yeah, I have no complaints, but really no complaints.
No, it's really gorgeous. I mean, where they haven't gone with stock photography from the 20s, you know, they've done some amazing things. It's really evocative.
One of the things that I will say about it is less horror. It's weird. It's cosmic entity grossness, but there are no severed limbs. There's no creature biting a person in half, right?
No, but there are plenty of like...
There's tentacle monsters.
There's tentacle monsters, and there was one creature at the end of the book that, you know, looked just like a pile of legs.
Legs and tombs. Like,
yeah.
That's what I mean. It's cosmic weird. It is definitely cosmic horror, but it is not cosmic gore.
Yeah.
And I feel like it very easily could have sunk into that. And the artwork in this is surprisingly PG, which is not to say that I would hand this to a 10-year-old. The art will probably upset them the way that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was in the fucking elementary school library terrorizing all the 7-year-olds. But there's nothing in it that's like actually rated R. It's just uncomfortable to look at. The H.R. Giger art is rated R art. Those just dicks on dicks on dicks, right? But like, this isn't rated R for either gore or sexuality, but it is weird and it's uncomfortable to look at, and I'm here for it. I fucking love it. Good job on that. Whoever was in charge of the artistic design on this did a fantastic job of getting the right artists and the right size, and I'm not going to say the right placement, because sometimes it was like, why are there pictures of people from the 1920s in this section and not over in the section about the 1920s? But like, they did a pretty good fucking job, especially considering indie publisher, right? What grade do you give it overall?
I'm going to give it about a 6. Again, I'm not...
The A to F scale.
Oh, A to F?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going 6 or 1 to 10.
Yeah. What is that, a C+?
That's about a C+. I mean, I like what they've done with it. I wish I was more interested in the subject material.
Sure.
Right? I don't feel as if Lovecraft is the only place you can go to get cosmic horror.
No, but he is like the first place that you go. Honestly, some of my favorite cosmic horror is Stephen King short stories.
Sure.
And there's so much more out there that is cosmic horror. You ever see you know what? I bet you haven't, because it's not your cup of tea. Cabinet of Curiosities.
That was...
Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, I watched probably the first episode, and I don't think I watched any further.
Every one of them is so wildly different, like Black Mirror.
Yes.
But every one of them is gross in some way. Like, it is, but like gross cosmic horror, right? So...
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very much... And it runs the gamut of like, this one's just about giant rats. And this one's about... Oh, God, I can't even... What, for those of you who have watched it, what was that fucking makeup goop episode about? There's a lot of shit going on in Cabinet of Curiosities, and it's not your cup of tea.
No.
It's very much Dan's cup of tea. And Dave will watch it over his phone and go, weird, huh, neat, right? But Terry's not going to watch it. Kyle will fucking eat it up. I know that Megan, Casey, and Peps are going to be all over it, and James will say it's not worth my time when I have anime that I could be watching, right? Like, for some people, yes. For other people, no. But taking away... So you give it a C+, sure. Taking away your level of interest in the theme of it, what do you think about the book, the layout, the presentation, the publication itself?
Still C+.
Yeah?
Yeah, they could have done a lot more work to streamline it, make it a little bit more easier for players to be able to approach it, specifically because it is the de facto player's handbook, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to be able to navigate and get the information that you need.
I wonder if this book is a echo, a reverberation of previous decisions on previous editions.
Oh, probably.
If the layout of this is, well, they're expecting us to have chapter 3 is this, and chapter 5 is skills, and chapter this is this, and all the way through it, because that's how 5th edition did it, and 4th edition, 3rd edition, only to determine, like, over time, we lost the fucking plot. This could have been, ordered differently, but it made perfect sense in 2nd edition, right?
Well, I mean, you have to think of the way that these things were distributed back in the 80s. These were all zines.
Yeah.
Right? And they were all, whether or not they were additive or not, didn't really make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
They were oftentimes hand-published, hand-printed for people to be able to disseminate or amongst their group. So it makes sense that it would be all cobbled together. I just wish that even in its cobbled together state in 2019, when Chaosium picked it up, they should have probably streamlined it a little.
I do want to point out that when we look at the credits page here, there are names, like there are a couple of dozen people that went into it, but only a couple of dozen. When you look at the actual, like, Investigator Handbook title page, there's not a whole lot of names there when you compare it to Paizo or Wizards of the Coast, right? Like, this is one of the bigger small publishers.
Sure.
And so I do want, like, we acknowledge that it's not perfect, and that's okay. There are probably not the resources that we expect from a full-time crew working on this with game designers around the clock, right? So I'm going to give this, honestly, a B, because the information is there. I cannot say the same about some of the other books and tabletop role-playing games that I've looked into, where I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. Where's the fucking details? Right? This has too many details in too many weird places, but they're all there.
Yes, which is a stark contrast to Cthulhu Tech, which had a whole bunch of information on very specific things.
It was so narrow.
And then nothing on anything else.
Yeah. So I will give this a B. My final question is, when should someone add this publication to the library? And clearly, when you're ready to play Call of Cthulhu.
I'm going to say that this is the second system you pick up after you've, oh, hey, I've introduced myself to D&D. That's kind of cool. What's the next one? Oh, I've heard about this Call of Cthulhu thing. Guaranteed, people more often are going to pick this up as their second system.
Yes. I will say this is also a good system to pick up after Pathfinder as well.
Sure.
So whether you start off in D&D or Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu with their percentile dice, and they're like, it's all percentile dice and you're rolling under, which is really fun and really neat. This is a break from what you're used to, which is the D20 system of both. I mean, you have bounded accuracy in 5th edition and not in Pathfinder, but it's still D20 systems, right? This is going to be the next one that I think makes the most sense, because as all of the other ones that we've looked at have been like, oh, neat. I wonder how that works at the fucking table, right? L5R works at the table pretty well. Legend of the Five Rings is a pretty well thought out system, but it's simplistic like 5th edition is. This is deep like Pathfinder is. There will be a role for everything, and you are able to figure out exactly what your limitations are, and you can get really, really good at really weird shit. Right? So I actually quite fucking love this system. If I didn't have to work, if I was independently wealthy, and literally all of my friends were as well, if we could add more games to the week, I want to play a homebrew zombie apocalypse survival guide, or survival game rather, with this system. I think it suits it really fucking well. What are you good at? What can you learn about? And don't get into a fight you'll probably fucking lose, right? I think that the system, the percentile system here, works so well for survivalist gameplay.
Agreed.
So, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
For as much as I've been shitting on it, I really did actually enjoy playing it.
Yeah, we had some good times. It was definitely chaos at the fucking table.
Yes.
It was beer and pretzels, when I do believe that this game requires a certain amount of gravitas, which we did not add to the table. However, we will talk about that in a future episode too. That's it for this episode on Call of Cthulhu Investigator Handbook. If you've been inspired by any conversations in this episode, you can reach us through our subreddit, r/itsAmimic, our Facebook group, our Instagram, or if you're one of the patrons, you can hit us up on our Patreon Discord. If you'd like to support us, you can check out the show notes below for links to that Patreon, as well as our website where you can donate or check out our store. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and leave positive reviews, because every little bit helps. Thank you for listening to Legend Lore from the It's a Mimic podcast. New releases will be aired on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as dozens of other podcast apps, and previously published materials will be discussed on our Patreon. If you are interested in more tabletop role-playing game conversations, please browse the episode guide at www.itsamimic.com. How do you feel about Keanu Reeves? I am on record as fucking hating Nicolas Cage, but I can't figure out how I feel about Keanu Reeves.
Okay, so Keanu Reeves has gone through a renaissance, I feel.
Yep.
Whereas Nick Cage has always just been batshit crazy doing Nick Cage things.
I don't think he always was. Leaving Las Vegas, The Rock.
He was still batshit crazy. He was a little bit unhinged. Even in The Rock, we view that movie with rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah, we absolutely do. However, I want to say he was not the fucking maniac that he is now. Like, he has ramped up the weirdness.
Well, even before Leaving Las Vegas, he did that one where he did the classic rant of the alphabet at somebody.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I just don't like Nicolas Cage, but Keanu Reeves has had a renaissance, and I don't understand why.
He became an internet darling.
I know he lost his wife and his daughter.
Yeah.
Right, and has gone on record just being very open about I'm just lonely, and that alone will score internet points. But
he also does things like rides the subway when he doesn't have to, and he does supposedly down to earth human being things.
Sure. Am I not down to earth because I don't ride the fucking SkyTrain in Vancouver?
I mean, you would.
Okay, yeah, I guess I would.
Right? And I mean...
And I have.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah, so he does that. He had that entire thing with Cyberpunk, with Silverhand. He was a character in Cyberpunk 2077, and
I love that, that is such a you fucking answer, too. Everybody else would be well, John Wick. And you're well, Cyberpunk 2077.
Well, okay, no, but specifically, the thing was when they announced that he was part of it, he got up on stage and somebody yelled at him, "You're breathtaking!" And he shot back right away, "No, you're breathtaking!" Right? But I think pre-Renaissance Keanu Reeves was just on the verge of The Matrix, just before The Matrix. So you had your Point Break, you had your, Bill and Ted, you had your dumb stoner Californiite.
Johnny Mnemonic.
Right? That level of stuff, right?
Okay, I'm going to come right out and say it. I don't think The Matrix is nearly as groundbreaking as everybody else seems to think it fucking is. I think it's groundbreaking for Gen Z the way that Avatar is going to be groundbreaking for Gen Alpha.
I think that it introduced people to a whole bunch of ideas that they hadn't thought before.
I think it introduced the mass public to it.
That's a lot of people.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you want to get technical about it, Sean, fuck you. But no, you and I mean, we were reading science fiction before that. These were not unique. Oh, you're in a simulation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I mean, there's the entire thing about the parable of the cave. What's it? Anyways.
A handful of Alice in Wonderland fucking references and a philosophy major does not make a good movie.
No.
But anyways, that's just me being a little bit of a hater because I liked The Matrix, but it was a gimmick to me because I remember what the marketing campaign was for it. Just black posters with green letters or green numbers in the standard Matrix.
Yeah.
And then underneath that, what is The Matrix? No trailers. It was one of the first viral marketing things out there, and I was very much looking out of the corner of my eye at it. I saw it opening weekend, but I went, wow, that was pretty fun. I get why it's memed all to shit. I also get why after 2.5 hours of it, and we get into the rest of the fucking series, everyone loses their patience with it. It was bad the whole time. It just wasn't bad repeatedly until the later ones.
I understand why it got additional movies. I don't feel as if it was originally shot to be a trilogy.
No, I don't think
it may have been originally planned, but only shot with one movie in mind.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
But I don't think it was originally shot to be a trilogy or now a quadrilogy. That said, the Animatrix was pretty
I really liked the Animatrix. And if I'm going to be honest, I really like the second half of the sequel, the second one.
Sure.
That one of the best car chases of cinema history.
Yeah.
But that's not what people talk about when they talk about the legacy of the Matrix. Right?
No. But and I think we approach it more from the lore building, the world building,
Sure.
It was an interesting world to play in at the very least.
Mm-hmm. But it did feel like it should have deserved one season of an anime and then been done. It needed 20 episodes, and we're still talking about 25 years later.
It would have been really good as an anime.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it really would have.
And I will say this as well. I think that that bullet time is what made it famous.
Think so?
It got spoofed in everything from Scary Movie to Shrek.
I think the outfits also did.
It was peak 90s leather, But I mean, I almost blame the X-Men movie for that more than the Matrix. Like that whole, like, if you want to be cool, if you're fucking Underworld, your Blade Trinity, everybody's just wearing black leather bodysuits.
You're Batman and Robin.
No, that one we do not. The bat nipples do not come into the conversation, Sean.
You're welcome.
Fuck. Anyway, no, I'm just like, how do you feel about Keanu Reeves? I like the John Wick movies well enough, but like, I don't.
I like the effort that he puts into what he does. I like how down to earth he is.
I respect the shit out of the man for being a human being.
Yeah.
And seemingly with no ego.
Or at least a checked ego.
Sure. But I respect him as a human being. I don't understand this internet darling, this godhood. Remember when everyone was loving the shit out of Bill Murray a few years back? The chive fucking took off and all that shit. You know what I'm talking about now?
Yeah.
Right? I feel like we're doing that to Keanu Reeves to some degree. But he's not leaning into it the way that we had a very Murray Christmas on Netflix. Like, we're not going to get that out of Keanu Reeves. He's not going to show up in a Zombieland movie to suck his own dick for the fucking camera, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I was driving up the mountain today and I was thinking, what the fuck?
At the same time, with the news and the media so saturated with revelations of awful people having done awful things and then hiding it, it is refreshing to have somebody so open who we don't necessarily have to apologize for enjoying.
Yeah, look, and I get that. I was just thinking, like, it's funny, I don't know why, I was thinking about kind of celebrity status and how it's not the same now as it was 20 years ago. Like, the world's very different in the world of social media, right? The Kardashians hit, and nothing has ever been the same since. And I was thinking, like, Keanu Reeves being Canadian, he's kind of what the reputation of Canadians is, just like this polite, down-to-earth guy. When it's not really. We're just as much assholes as everybody else. Have you seen our war crimes? Look at our war crimes, right?
The Geneva checklist.
Yeah, right. But I was thinking, it's like someone took an average Canadian and split him into two and took all of the like down to earth, mellow, introverted aspect and gave it to Keanu Reeves, and everything else went to Jim Carrey.
Jesus.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that was my initial thought. I'm like, the other thing is, I don't know why Timothée Chalamet is a fucking household name.
I don't get it.
I
don't get it. The kid's all like angles. I feel as if he can cut somebody by turning his head.
So first of all, I think that he was all right in Dune. I have no problem with that.
Sure.
Also, I didn't see Wonka. I don't see the need for Wonka. I saw the Johnny Depp Willy Wonka, and I went, I never need any of this story ever again in my life. I'm fine without the Oompa Loompas in my fucking life. But apparently it was good, and people really liked it, and the guy can sing. Apparently singing and dancing is one of his, like, initial talents that got him stardom, and, like, I respect the shit out of that.
Well, and the reason he got Wonka was because that was his big thing in high school.
Oh, was it?
When they did Wonka as a musical.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Good for him then. I like that. But I'm with you 100%. He looks like the fucking main character from Corpse Bride.
Yes! Yeah. Oh my god, yes!
Right? Like, I feel like someone took a China doll, pulled all the stuffing out of it, and gave it polio. And we got Timothée Chalamet.
Oh my god.
Right? Like, am I alone with that?
Maybe that one. I'm going to distance myself from you in that one.
For all of you out there with polio listening to the podcast, right. I apologize.
All three of you now?
Fuck. Yep, good times. No, I really don't understand what the fucking deal is with Timothée Chalamet. There are a few other ones that, like, I'm disconnected from the music scene in a pretty big way. It was recently announced that Donald Glover is going to be, like, retiring his Childish Gambino.
Yep.
And this right on the fucking heels of Eminem, killing Slim Shady. And I'm like, do we need this? Who's asking for the status updates on our alter egos? What are we waiting for from the Gorillas? Like, what's coming next? And why are we giving a shit? Do we still give a shit? I actually really liked the last project that the Gorillas did. Yeah. But, and I didn't hate Eminem's new album. It was kind of a return to form, but I think it was a very calculated one, and it felt calculated. So, I don't know. I am just rambling, but, like... It has been a long-ass fucking week, and it is late on a Friday night, and if I can be perfectly honest, I'm so tired of celebrities. Yeah. I think I just, like, I am in my 40s, and I'm, like, finally at the point where I'm comfortable not getting it. I've been rolling my eyes now for over a year about Skibbity Toilet or whatever fucking risen shit up, or like, I'm fucking done, I don't care.
Behold your field of fucks, and see that it is barren.
Pretty fucking much.
Yep.
So I don't know. I was just wondering what my contemporaries feel about Keanu Reeves, specifically Keanu Reeves, because all of the others come with the fucking asterisks of like celebrity stardom. But I feel like if he was at a party and no one introduced him, he would not introduce himself. As he would not go seeking that stardom, that recognition in a room full of strangers. And
I could agree with that.
And I appreciate that. I respect it. I'm not gonna say that like he deserves my undying love and affection because
nope.
That makes him a good dude. That doesn't make him a fucking god among Hollywood stars. But
no. And I feel like that's a problem with celebrity in general, right? You're putting them up on an altar.
That's why people like Jennifer Lawrence for so fucking long, right?
Mm-hmm. Because she was fresh and
she was down to earth and she didn't play the game, and then she started playing the game and everybody hated her. It's why Brendan Fraser has made a big comeback, because he showed up with no ego and vulnerability. And I'm like, it's why Tom Hanks has kind of fallen out of favor with the mass public, because he was that man with no ego until he was a man with an ego, right? The ego showed up, and like, I don't know. I guess I see why not having ego is a big deal, but and again, we do pump regular people full of ego just as a fucking act of boredom on our part.
Absolutely.
So that's what the hunt for fucking followers and being an influencer and all that shit is, right?
Well, and I'll also say that like the attraction to celebrity and the attraction to influencers is only heightened by the media that people are consuming, right? It's only heightened by Reddit. It's only heightened by the 24 hours news cycle. It's only heightened by
Instagram and TikTok and
YouTube YouTube Shorts and that level of stuff.
Yeah.
And Facebook and all of that, right? So I feel like perhaps we are more aware of celebrity happenings now than we were 10 years ago or even 15 years ago.
Also, maybe for you and I, because it's so in our faces, but I mean, we did not really give a fuck about celebrity status when we were younger. No, that was not what you and I were doing with our free fucking time.
No,
right?
It was not.
So, like I say, we knew the story of the Matrix before the Matrix came out. We were clearly being nerds. So, if someone asked, who's your favorite celebrity, you were likely to get a Star Trek answer.
Yes.
Fuck. All right. We should probably do this episode.
Should we?